to welcome you to a seminar that was postponed from a couple of weeks ago, hotly anticipated. We'll be looking at the future of Redhills, the Durham Miners Association. We have inherited the past and we will build the future, to borrow from their phrase. And today I'm delighted to welcome Chris McDonald. Chris is chair of the Redhills and also Chief Executive Officer of the Materials Processing Institute. The Institute is UK's National Centre for Metals Innovation, developing new technologies in the areas of advanced materials, digital technologies, industrial decarbonisation and the circular economy. In 2014, Chris led the divestment of the 75-year-old institute, returning it to independent ownership as a not-for-profit organisation with both a strong societal and ethical mission. Chris has a background in industrial research and manufacturing. He's worked around the globe. He's a graduate of Cambridge and a fellow of the Institute of Chemical Engineers and Institute of Materials, Minerals, Mining and the Royal Geographical Society. He's the chair of the UK Metals Council and a member of the Regional Council of the CBI and policy chair for innovation and enterprise at the Federation of Small Businesses. And he's often called on to communicate to the media and speak about a range of topics on industrial strategy, digital technologies, steel and decarbonisation. He provides expert opinion to companies, government and non-governmental organisations in these areas, supporting policy development. He's a strong interest in the wider social aspects of impact of business, including such as economic inequality, diversity and inclusion, employment participation, environmental sustainability, all of which are on his YouTube channel, as indeed will this be paired with DEI. I'm delighted to introduce Chris and look forward to hearing some of the future plans for Redhills. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, John. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you very much to Lynn for the invitation and for organising this event as well. And I'd also like to thank people who've accommodated the change in date as well. The previous date that we had arranged for this, I know it was very popular, but it wasn't possible to go ahead with the event due to industrial action here at the university. So it's good to be back up and running. And I just want to share a few slides with you and talk about the project that we're undertaking at Redhills, the historic home of the Durham Miners Association, and what we're trying to achieve through Redhills for the communities of County Durham and beyond. So you can see here a beautiful photograph of Redhills in its grounds. It's only a 20-minute walk away from where I am here at the university. I know that because I've just walked from my office at Redhills here in the Durham sunshine. And I mentioned it's the historic home of the Durham Miners Association. And in fact, you can see the motto of the Durham Miners Association there, the past we inherit, the future we build. And actually, that's going to be the structure of my talk today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the past, what used to happen at Redhills, and the past in terms of the organisation of the workforce in the coalfield in County Durham. And then also talk about the future, what we're planning to do with this building and with this legacy that we've inherited from the Durham Miners Association, who built this building and organised the miners in County Durham as well. So we're going to start with almost beyond the past. So something that happened even before the start of the Durham Miners Association, and that's this chap here who's called Thomas Hepburn. So the Durham Miners Association was founded in 1869, but sometime before then, Thomas Hepburn, who was born in 1795 near Gateshead, founded what was the first miners' trade union. At the time that he founded it, in 1831, it was an illegal trade union. And he founded it for one reason and one reason alone. And that was to try and reduce the working hours for boys underground from 18 hours a day to 12 hours a day. So I'm just going to let that sink in for a moment for you. But boys from the age of 7 or 8 would work 6 days a week underground, 18 hours a day. And he campaigned to have that reduced to 12 hours a day. Now, the good news is he was successful. The working day for boys was reduced to 12 hours a day. But as a consequence of that, the union that he formed was broken. He was blacklisted. He never worked in a colliery ever again. He ended his days selling tea door to door round the doors in County Durham, which is something that still happens to this day. I buy my tea door to door in County Durham. And he was driven to do this through his background and upbringing. He was a Methodist local preacher, and he was also part of the Chartist movement as well. And this is something that we see that goes through very much through the pioneers of organised labour in the Durham coalfield as well. Now, he's shown here in a bust that's in the Durham Miners Hall, wearing very fancy clothes. I doubt he ever wore clothes like that in his life, but it shows you the reverence in which he is still held. He's buried in the graveyard of Hewith Church in Gateshead, and every year there's an annual service at his graveside as well to honour what he did. So if we fast forward a bit beyond Thomas Hepburn, and we get onto the founding of the actual Durham Miners Association, just as Hepburn founded his union on a single issue, so the Durham Miners Association was founded on a single issue as well. And that issue was this document you can see in front of you, which is called the bond. So the bond is essentially an act of slavery in that every year, every miner who worked at a colliery had to sign up to work at that colliery for another year under the terms and conditions at the mine. It was a legal contract. You can see in the top left there, it's very detailed, contains a lot of very detailed wording. This particular bond's from 1766. It's held in the collection at Redhills, and it's from Wrighton Colliery. And all of the miners who wanted to work in that colliery at some point in the next year had to sign the bond and commit to 1 year's worth of work. At the end of the year, they'd be asked to sign the bond again, and so on. If they broke the terms of the bond, they would not only lose their job, they'd lose their house as well. They'd be immediately evicted. They'd be unlikely to work in a mine anywhere else in the Durham coalfield. And if you look down this bond, you'll see that beside many of the names, there's a cross. And that simply indicates that the man who signed that document was unable to read or write. So he made his mark with a cross. So he didn't even know what he was signing up to, actually. So the Durham Miners Association was founded in order to break the bond. And I said the bond was essentially an act of slavery. It was legal, but the trade union that the Durham Miners Association formed was illegal at that time. But it was also successful. And with the help of Mr. Roberts there, who you can see on the banner of Thompson Solicitors, known as the Pitman's Attorney, they managed to break the bond, initially at Monk Wearmouth Colliery, and then within the space of a couple of years across the whole of the Durham coalfield. And it was that significant achievement in terms of organisation, which enabled the Durham Miners Association to be formed and to flourish, essentially, to demonstrate its benefit to the miners of County Durham. And from that, then, we have all of the other measures that have followed in terms of working conditions, health and safety, and education and so on as well, which I'll come on to talk about. But I think it's important to think about the fundamental rights and principles that the founders of the Durham Miners Association were working for at that time. So the Miners Association went on from success to success. It built initially a miners' hall in North Road in Durham, which is quite close to where the bus station is. And then in 1915, the current miners' hall at Redhills, which is very close to the East Coast Main Line. And you can see it from the train as you head south out of Durham on your right-hand side. And the hall was built very specifically with a very kind of grandiose architecture to intimidate the coal owners, to say to coal owners, we are as good as you. We have capital, we have influence, we have education, and we can deal with you on the same basis. And so how far the Durham miners had come in the space of 40 or 50 years from breaking the bond to owning their own purpose-built trade union headquarters. So I thought I'd talk to you about some of the people who really featured strongly in that early history of the Durham Miners Association. But first, let's have a chat about how those people got involved and how it was organised. So you can see here what is the heart of Redhills, the building that's known as the part of the building that's known as the Pitman's Parliament. And it was a real crucible of democracy. So this building opened at a time before working people had the vote. And yet in every colliery in County Durham, representatives were elected to come to Redhills, to sit in a seat and to participate in democracy. And you can see that the seats that are lined up there, every single one of those seats corresponded to one of the settlements. So there are about 300 seats in about 300 settlements in County Durham. And so everyone had a vote on an equal basis. You can also see as well, I mean, hopefully you can see by looking at in the right-hand corner of the photograph there, you can see a little indentation for the delegates to put their pens or their pencils. And the piece of wood in front of that is actually a desk that lifts up. So everybody had a desk and everyone had a place to put their writing instruments. And so what that demonstrates is the people who turned up here were expected to be able to read and write. They were expected to make reports back to their lodges. They were expected to be literate and to be able to participate in democratic debate. That might not seem an unusual thing to us now, but at the time that was a significant standard that was placed on the delegates who were there, who were attending at that time. The hall, as it stands now, has been emptied because the building is being refurbished. But if you walked into it, what you would feel is that it operates on a very human scale. So there's one single stall for every person who's in there, and everyone has an equal voice. And the miners there, they started by thinking about their terms and conditions and their lives underground, but they went on beyond that to think about their lives above ground as well. What was important in terms of their social welfare, art and culture, and education in their communities too. And they've left a real legacy in that respect as well. So let's have a talk about some of the important people in the Durham coalfield. And the first person I'd like to talk about is a lady called Annie Errington. I mean, obviously she wasn't a miner by virtue of the fact that she wasn't a man, but she was married to a miner. And she was a campaigner in the Durham coalfield. And particularly when you think about some of these aspects of the Durham Miners Association associated with politics and with the welfare of people above ground, Annie Errington was one of the people who feature strongly in that. So you can see Annie in this photograph. She's the face furthest to the top of the photograph there, standing right at the back. She's actually pictured here in Leningrad in 1926, about to board the train. And the reason she's in Leningrad is because she and a party of other miners' wives travelled to Russia and to the Ukraine, including to the Donbass, which is why I thought it might be interesting to mention her today, to meet representatives of the mining trade unions in the former Soviet Union to gain their support for the general strike in the UK as well, and support for the Durham miners. And actually, there's been since then quite a strong connection between those mining communities over many decades. Annie had probably never left County Durham before she made this trip, but she went to St. Petersburg, she went to Moscow, she went to Leningrad, she went to Mariupol. She travelled all around the Donbass, and then she came back to Sacriston. And when she did come back to Sacriston, she was vilified. So you can see in the bottom right-hand part of this document here, an article that shows that she was very popular amongst her own community. She led a meeting of 10 to 12,000 people who she presided over that meeting in Sunderland, and she addressed that group. So obviously she's a woman who's very used to being at the head of a large organisation, but she was vilified in her own city, in this city, in Durham, where a meeting was held at Durham Town Hall specifically to denounce her. One of the speakers at the meeting was the colliery manager of Sacriston Colliery, so actually her husband's boss. And it was regarded essentially that she was acting beyond her station, that she shouldn't behave in that way, but that didn't in any way persuade Annie to give up. She went on to be surcharged and threatened with imprisonment in 1927 because, as one of the poor law guardians of Chesterley Street, she authorised payments to unemployed miners that were considered to be overgenerous. But she didn't stop doing that. And in fact, she became a JP in 1938 and a county councillor as well. And she went on to have a very successful political career. And I think we can see in Annie and in Thomas Hepburn before her, and actually also in the founders of the Durham Miners Association, people who were prepared to stand up to make a difference, regardless of their personal consequences. And it must have been an incredible pressure that was placed on these individuals. And yet they were still prepared to do it. And as a result, they made a huge difference as well. And you can see the founders of the Durham Miners Association here in the statues that are outside Redhills. And I took this photograph from my office. My office is in a little cottage in the grounds. And the reason I thought I'd share this photo is we've heard a lot about statues in the news over the last year or so, but here are some good statues, some really good statues. So these are statues of working men, all miners, who founded the Durham Miners Association. And they are generally shown, as are many of the portraits, actually, of the officials of the Durham Miners Association, holding some form of book or parchment. And again, it comes back to this point about the writing instruments and the writing desk to demonstrate that they were literate and educated. And they put a real education. So if you reflect back on these chaps here or on Thomas Hepburn, they left school at the age of 7 or 8. They worked 6 days a week underground. They went to church on Sunday morning. Their only opportunity for education was at Sunday school, generally on a Sunday afternoon. So they were learning to read and write on a Sunday afternoon. So it's no wonder that Thomas Hepburn was a Methodist lay preacher. It's no wonder that most of these people, and in fact, the early founders of the Durham Miners Association and many of the county councillors in Durham were also Methodists as well, as am I, as it happens, because that was where they gained their education. It's where they gained their confidence to speak. And it's also where they were challenged on a weekly basis to go out and make a difference to the world as well. So I think it's important that we sort of recognise this and we sort of celebrate what, you know, this great achievement that these people did. So I want to stick with this theme of education because it's something that I'm particularly interested in. And in the unpacking of Redhills, as we've over the last year or so started to go through the archives, started to open cupboards that haven't been opened in many decades, we've come across a lot of real gems. And this is one of them. What this is the county tutorial class. And this is a series of lectures that ran at the very least from 1954 to 1977. They may have gone on beyond then, they may have started earlier, but we can't be certain. And usually the tutor for these classes was whoever was the General Secretary of the Durham Miners Association at the time. And what a couple of things I'd like to point out here. So this class was a class for students to turn up at the Miners Hall at Redhill at 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon to receive a lecture and a series of 12 lectures. And if you attended all 12, you had your bus fare refunded as well, but you had to come to all 12 of them. But I think the thing that's really, really important about this is if you can see in the middle of the poster, it says the subjects to be decided by the students themselves during the session. So the tutor on here, Sammy Watson, Mr. Sammy Watson, he was General Secretary of the Durham Miners Association for a very long time, very influential character at the time. Presumably he went to church, had his Sunday lunch, and then at 3 o'clock he rolled into Redhills. And he asked the students, the 300 of them sat in that room that you've seen, what should I lecture you on today? And they told him, and then he gave a 1-hour lecture on that topic. Now, I think as a lecturer, that's quite challenging. But the important point here is, through this system, the Durham Miners Association recognised the importance of self-directed learning, recognise that what's important to the students is they learn the things that they think that they need to know. I think that's a really progressive point to pick up from at the time. But also this is beyond the bounds of normal education. This is general education that is being offered here as well. And it goes, again, beyond the bounds of what you would expect a typical trade union would offer. And this, as I said, continued for many decades through a series of different lecturers. And having had some discussion about it, this is something that we will revive, at least in part, as part of our future plans for Redhills. So that was kind of education. And as well as investing in education, the Durham Miners Association also, and the Durham Miners, in fact, invested a lot in art and culture too. And you can see here a couple of pictures, a couple of paintings that I wanted to share with you. And the one on the left, of course, is Noble Cornish, a miner from Spennymoor. The one on the right is called Miner and Child from Tom McGuinness, and I picked that one just because I like it. And what I wanted to say here really is, if you have artistic talent and you happen to be born in County Durham, then there are probably fewer options, or there certainly were then, and frankly there are now, fewer options for patronage, or fewer options for you to be able to develop and express your talent in ways that there would be in other parts of the country. And that was recognised, and the importance of art and culture was recognised by the Durham Miners Association, and they sought to foster and to develop that as well, alongside what they were doing in improving people's working conditions as well. And to give you a sense of how important people thought that was at the time, I showed you that picture of Annie Errington. That was in 1926 during the general strike. And whilst Annie was off in Leningrad at the Donbass, there was a meeting of the Durham Miners Association to discuss the conditions of miners that weren't at work, because they were striking miners, but also miners were losing their jobs. So you saw that hall there. You can imagine it full of delegates, all of these miners, got the bus into Durham that day, and their officials, their elected officials who ran the Durham Miners Association, will have come down from the offices upstairs onto the platform to discuss a series of motions, and everything in the Durham Miners Association was done by democracy. So the ballots, ballot after ballot after ballot after ballot. One of the ballots that went through that day, or one of the ballots that was proposed that day by the officials, was that the Durham Miners Association should cut its budget on art and culture in order to ease the burden on the miners, so there's more money in their pockets, essentially. So cut the budget on art and culture, cut the Durham Miners Association budget, as a result, reduce the payments from individual miners to the Durham Miners Association. And it was defeated. That motion was defeated by the miners themselves. So, you know, you can imagine the officials thinking, well, we're going to do something that will really help to give people a financial boost at this time whilst many are unemployed. But what the miners are saying is, at this time when we're unemployed, this is the time when we really do need some art and some culture and some distraction from our daily lives as well. And that's in 1926. And I see that as a real kind of grassroots expression from working people of the importance of art and culture in their lives. And it's art and culture that they're doing themselves as well, not art and culture that's being delivered to them. So there's this really strong history of that. And I think it's interesting to mention that and to mention the education, because what we see and what we still see to this day is the legacy of the Durham Miners Association in terms of community centres, football fields, brass bands. I play in a brass band as well. Cricket pitches, or aged miners' homes, all of these things, infrastructure that was put in place. But there was also this soft infrastructure as well, the infrastructure associated with education and art and culture too. So look, that's the past that we inherit. And it is a past that's about buildings and organisations, but it's more a past that's about people and communities as well. And so I want to talk now about the future that we're going to build from that. And so first of all, this building, this place, Redhills, it's been recognised by Historic England as one of the 100 most important places in Britain, and had a special little subcategory for places of democracy. And there are only two buildings in that. One is Redhills, and the other one is the Palace of Westminster. So it stands as an incredibly significant building in terms of the UK's history, and so we need to respect that whilst we're taking the building forward and planning to deliver for the community of County Durham. And then another thing that we have, I think that's very much of the future, is of course the Durham Miners Gala. I mean, this is the single most visible expression of the community, of the culture of the community of County Durham that exists. That's my band right in the middle there. You can't see me, I'm on the back row, but you can see my brother who also plays in the band as well. You can just about see him too. And I think one thing that's really interesting about the Durham Miners Gala is that a lot of people really misunderstand what it's about. So in 2016, a journalist called Bloodworth came to the Durham Miners Gala to write about it. And he described it as a carnival of nostalgia, something like a historical reenactment society, highlighting how when the past becomes an obsession, it can act as a dead weight on meaningful action in the present. Of course, what he's failed to realise is there's nothing about the past in the Durham Miners Gala. It's a celebration of real living communities that exist today, with a very positive outlook on what those communities will do in the future as well. So when we talk about the future that we'll build, it starts with that, this really strong sense of community spirit that we have in Durham and at the Durham Miners Gala. And I saw that myself just a few weeks ago. So in many of the sort of settlements around County Durham, many of the villages have their banners, and they take their banners into the Durham Miners Gala every year. And they have groups that raise money to buy new banners when the old ones wear out. They last about 10 years. But here I was in Hunwick, where they've just raised money to buy a new banner for what was the Roughly colliery that was based in Hunwick. Now that colliery closed many years ago, decades ago. The Hunwick haven't had a banner in the Durham Miners Gala since the 1960s, but they have now. This is not an expression of anything to do with the past. This is the community of Hunwick coming together now to raise money to be able to go into the Durham Miners Gala to showcase their own community, and that's precisely what they're going to do. So that event was a few weeks ago. Was to show the community the new banner that they commissioned and that they will proudly take into the Durham Miners Gala. And I think another great example of this as well is the women's banner, which was only quite recently been commissioned. And this banner celebrates a lot of women from the Durham coalfield, again, over many decades. And it's the only banner I've ever seen with a hashtag on it. So really bringing banners into the modern era as well. And I think a really fabulous way to use a banner too, and it kind of moves the banners on to be something else. So they really are new and different. So what we've done at Redhills, we've taken on this building, we're developing this building, we're building on this past. And as John said, I chair the Redhills Charity that's been set up to do this, to deliver this for the future. So a question a lot of people ask me is why? Why do you do this? Why are you even involved on this? Because it's not my day job. I do have a day job, but this is not it. So I thought I'd tell you a bit about why it is that I do that. And so I've put some of the aspects of my life on here that you can see, so you can understand that. So I mentioned to you already, I play in the band. There I am on Durham Meeting Day 2017 or 18, I think that probably was, playing in my band in Durham Cathedral on Big Meeting Day. I work in the steel industry. Again, as John mentioned, I lead the Materials Processing Institute, which is based in Teesside. And there are some really strong links between steel communities and coal communities. Brought up in a coal community, and I work in the steel industry. So real sense of how that works. And the business that I run as John said, I set it up as a not-for-profit business, and there's a big sense of worker involvement, trade union recognition. We have a director directly elected to the board from the workforce as well. So I've tried to put into practice all of those sort of things that I think would please the original founders of the Durham Miners Association. And in fact, one of the things that I think I and the Durham Miners Association founders and members have in common as well is this real sense of the importance of good work. And that's, you can see me speaking on the platform at Redhills there just a couple of years ago, where I was talking about what the tradition of good work, so people who want to work and recognise the importance of work in their communities as well. And that's something that I think that we still sorely need in so many communities in County Durham after the sort of history we've had of the loss of the coalfield. So all of those things come together. So yes, there isn't an element of nostalgia there, but essentially I've got a skill set that works as well. So the culmination of that is I was asked if I would chair the Durham Miners Association, the new Redhills charity. But there's another thing as well. I've talked a lot about education and what the Durham Miners Association did on education in the past. And this is very much a personal mission for me. And I think it's really important that if we talk about the future we build, that future is built on creating opportunity for young people to achieve their potential. So this is something that I've done personally, and I've set up a couple of scholarships to help young people to do that. So you can see on here the Ashok Kumar Fellowship mentioned, which was named after a former Member of Parliament from the Teesside area who also used to work in the laboratories that I now lead. And he died suddenly of a heart attack in 2010. And that fellowship enables young people to spend some time at the Parliamentary Office of Science and Technology. And the Millman Scholarship, and you can see the photograph of the Millman Scholars down there on the left-hand side, which supports a young person from Teesside to study at a university in the UK. So I set those two scholarships up, and I had a really interesting discussion at Redhills recently with a lady called Fiona Hill, who is from Bishop Auckland and went on to become the National Security Advisor to 3 American presidents. And Fiona started her sorry, I thought I'd included a picture of Fiona and I haven't, but I have got a book here. So Fiona started her career as a result of a grant from the Durham Miners Association. So Fiona's written a book. It's called There Is Nothing for You Here. And that was actually what her father told her. So she's a really bright girl from Bishop Auckland. And what her father essentially told her was, you're going to have to leave this place if you're going to get on. And she did leave, and she went. She went to St Andrews University to learn Russian. She, as I say, she's now an American citizen, and she became national security advisor to 3 presidents. That kind of ended when she gave evidence against Donald Trump in his impeachment. And she's now a fellow at the Brookings Institute. But her whole career was started with a grant from the Durham Miners Association. And the reason for that is, and the point that Fiona makes very powerfully in her book, is there's no point giving someone an opportunity if they don't have the means to take that opportunity up. So the opportunity she was given was a place at St Andrews University to study Russian, but it required her to go and spend 6-8 weeks at a summer school, and her parents couldn't afford to send her there. But the Durham Miners Association had a grant from a fund that was set up by payments from miners from the Donbass. So there you go. So that's how she ended up getting there, and she learned Russian. So it's a really marvelous story. It's a beautiful story. And what it shows is just that little bit of help sometimes that you can give a young person can really transform their life. And of course, Fiona's very, very keen to get involved back at what we're doing, at Redhills as well. So I recommend that you buy a book and you read it, but also a really powerful story there about perhaps some of the help that we give people at Redhills or through these scholarship schemes. We can make a difference to people's lives. So anyway, we've had a formal handover of the building. You can see Alan Margin there, the head of the Durham Miners Association, presenting me with a miner's lamp as a formal handover of the Redhills building to us. And now we've started work on transforming the building. So you can see on this sketch map here a visualization of what the building might look like in about 18 months to 2 years' time when the building work's finished. We're going to build 2 new wings at the back of the building, either side of the Pitman's Parliament, to allow space for more conferences and events, community space. There'll be a cafe, a display of banners, space for people to get in and out more easily as well with disability access, which is really lacking in the building at the moment. People can turn up on a daily basis. They can engage in tours. There will be educational facilities there for young people from schools as well. And the community space can be used by people from the local community. And that's all good. But the real driving force in terms of the turnover of Redhills, the thing that will make the money, will be conferences and events. And you can imagine we've had a huge amount of interest from that already. Now, the purpose of this building isn't to make money, it's to do good. But our business model is we use the money from the conferences and events, and then we invest that back in art, culture, and education. And the majority of that art, culture, and education that we do will not be in this building in Durham. It will be in the communities that the building was originally built to serve. So that activity, that work, will happen in the various villages and towns in County Durham. And then, of course, the people in those villages and towns in County Durham can also come into Redhills to experience things there as well. So this is, and hopefully you've got the message from me now, this is not really a project about a building. It's a construction project that we're going to do now, and it's going to take us about 2 years to do it. But the real project is about the intangible capital, the opportunities that we can give young people through the educational programs that we deliver, and also the arts and culture and heritage events that we do as well. And one of the most popular things that we've done has been to offer people the opportunity to purchase one of these tokens to go on one of the seats in the Miners' Hall. People in here might well have done that. Everybody always asks me when I give a talk like this, can they still buy tokens? Not right now, because the seats have been removed from the hall and are safely stored. But once the seats come back in the hall, then people will be able to buy tokens again. And I'll give you a flavour of some of the events. Yes, that's right. Yes, picked my photos carefully, Lynn. But yeah, I'll give you a flavour of some of the events that we have carried out at the hall and that we intend to carry out at the hall in the future. So this was a discussion at the Durham Book Festival in 2020. We also hosted the Bright Ideas Conference as well, which was kind of a fringe event around Lumiere. And of course, Redhills has always been part of the Lumiere Festival as well, hosting light installations. And then in December, we had our annual Christmas concert, and that was an opportunity for me to tell people who were there at the time what we're planning to do. So they got kind of a mini version of this talk, what the mission of Durham, of Redhills in Durham is about. And also at that time, I said to people, if you want me to come out and give a talk to a community group or something like that, then let me know. And Lynn was first off the blocks, and I have done 4 talks now. This is the 4th one, but you were the first one to ask. Lynn. And we've done quite a lot of work with local schools as well. I mean, I mentioned some of the stuff we're doing around education, but education isn't all about kind of graduates and postgraduates, starts at primary school and in many other ways as well. And this was a kind of an act of democracy we had here, where children from local schools came together to write their own charter. And one of the things that we can do really is through this, I believe, is really help people to build confidence as well. So through some work that we've done, we can see that we have some really very talented young people at schools in County Durham who are very much held back by a lack of confidence. They maybe don't have the opportunity to practice, or people who've expressed in them their belief in their potential as well. And this can place them at a disadvantage. And if you think about what the purpose of this building was, it absolutely was to train leaders of the future. So people were brought through the system in their community to become representatives, and then they would go to the Pitman's Parliament and they'd be brought through that system to become leaders of the Durham Miners Association, and then some of them went on to lead national and international federations as a result. So there was a set system of leadership development, and we really want to reintroduce that as well. I mean, so someone said to me recently, there has been a bit of a discussion in the press, you might have realised, about the value or otherwise of Oxford Union debating skills. And someone said to me recently, have you seen Eton College have spent £8 million on building a new debating chamber to train their students up so that they can go into Parliament and so on? And I said to them, well, we're spending £8 million to build a debating chamber. That will be for the children of County Durham. And I expect some of them will go on to be the political leaders of the future as well. And so, sorry, here is Fiona Hill. Her photograph was inserted somewhat later than I thought. Here she is during that impeachment hearing, looking very serious. Here she is at Redhills, looking somewhat more relaxed, and looking through our photographs from miners from the Donbass, and she very kindly signed my copy of the book. So sorry, that was slightly out of sequence. And then the other thing on education as well, it's not even academic education in any way. So this is a community group that we're working with. The chap in the middle there, Nathan, who runs the Woodshed Workshop in Sacriston, where he trains young people how to use carpentry tools and engage in projects, and has a massively transformational impact on young people's lives. And actually, these young lads, and you can see if you look at the number 14 in the middle there, these young lads, under Nathan's supervision, have actually been dismantling the pews from the Pitman's Parliament and putting them into storage. These pews were custom made over 100 years ago and installed in that hall and have never been removed since. And these young lads have done a fantastic job in very carefully removing them, in using the craft skills that they've learned from Nathan as well. We had absolute confidence in them that they'd be able to do that, and they've just got on and they've delivered the job as well. And we will engage with more organisations like that where we can through our project too. And then again, if we look on to the future, a project that we're very heavily involved in, and I know Durham University is too, is the County of Culture bid for 2025. Redhills sits absolutely at the heart of that bid, because the bid is for Durham is a bid for the whole county, and it's also very much about cultural democracy. And of course, that is a great expression of what we're about at Redhills. We'll be hosting the judges for that bid week on Monday, I think, at Redhills. They'll also be coming to the university, of course, as well, and they'll be making their way out and around the county. I'm extremely confident in our prospects of winning the County of Culture. But even if we don't, actually, we've created a great cultural partnership in County Durham, and we'll use that to carry out more cultural projects throughout the whole of the county in that period of time. So there we are. I wanted to sort of leave it there, but maybe just with the benefit of one more slide to tell you a little bit about one more person from the Durham Miners Association, and that's this chap, Peter Lee. And there's two reasons I like to talk about Peter Lee. One is because the vast majority of people think he's a town and not a real person. And the other one is because Peter Lee is probably the closest you could get to my political hero, I think, actually. So if you look at the picture of Peter Lee there, he looks like somebody's granddad with his little grey beard and his cardigan on. But this guy became the head of the Durham Miners Association and of the Miners Federation of Great Britain and of the International Miners Federation all at the same time. and he was leader of Durham County Council as well, all at the same time. So he really held all of the levers of power that it is possible to hold. He chased private water companies out of towns and villages in County Durham, built reservoirs and provided people with clean, safe public water resources, as well as all of the other stuff that we've talked about around social security and aged miners' homes and welfare halls and sports facilities and all of these things as well. So he was someone who achieved a great deal, and he was very much a man of action. He got out and he did things, and he did not believe in any sense that because of who he was and where he was from and the place that he was in, that anything should hold him back in doing that. And I think he was really quite a tough guy. He also went over to the USA to essentially do mining over there and in South Africa as well before coming back to County Durham. So he clearly was a fairly tough guy. And I think you'd have to be as successful in some of the organisations that he ran at the time. But his politics was completely practical. It was about what is the best thing to do for the people and the communities that I am here to serve. And then he delivered on it. So I think for a politician, I don't think you can get better than that, actually. So, and he's someone I think he's a genuine local hero and someone I think we could celebrate and talk about more in County Durham as well. Thank you for indulging me to talk a little bit about Peter Lee, and maybe you'd be interested enough to go and find out a bit more about him afterwards as well. So thanks very much. That's a little trot through the history of the Durham Miners Association and Redhills and what we plan to do in the future. And I would very much welcome any questions from anybody.
We're getting the Zoomers. Yeah, we're going to organise their question. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Chris, for really stimulating presentation that I'm sure will give people plenty to talk about, and it's very inspiring to think about the future that lies ahead for Redhills. I think, is there anybody in the live audience that would like to kick off with a question? Can we have there first and then you, Andrew?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask a very obvious question. Is Peterlee town named after the person I think it was named after?
Yes, and it's really good that you have asked the question, actually. So the town of Peterlee was named after the man Peter Lee. But nearly everyone I speak to just thinks Peterlee is like a word, and the town, and very few people have heard of the man Peterlee himself, who it was named after. Interestingly, we did have an interesting discovery at Redhills recently, in that we've every year at the Durham Miners Gala, a poster is produced which says who the speakers are at the gala. And we found a poster and it has Peterlee's name on it and it's hyphenated. And of course, we all say Peter Lee. We don't say Peter or Mr. Lee. Everyone says Peter Lee. And so we were slightly puzzled by this, and we think maybe he was known in his life as Peter Lee. You know, I think that's possibly what people used to call him,
even though
hence the name of the town.
His first name was Peter.
His first name was Peter and his second name was Lee. But what we suspect is people just called him Peter Lee.
Right.
So there we are. But yes, the town is named after the man. Yeah.
Andrew.
Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. I loved it, every minute of it.
Thank you.
I'm a second year PhD student here, and Harrington Lodge as well.
Great.
And I think my question is, how can Durham University and the County of Durham improve their relationship?
Yeah, look, I think that's a really good question. And I think that so let me be frank about this. I think there is an issue here. As someone who lives and works in County Durham, has grown up here my whole life, and has also studied in an illustrious university just like Durham, I think there is no sense to me of a real link between the communities of County Durham and this university. And I think that's a massive lost opportunity on both sides, actually. I think it's a real shame, in fact, because there is a huge amount of talent. We know that there's a huge talent pool in County Durham, which is not fully realised because, you know, as I said with Fiona Hill, if you lack the wherewithal to transport yourself somewhere else, and you can't engage fully with the world-class university that's on your doorstep, then you've really missed out on that opportunity. And actually there isn't a simple answer to that, but it's a lost opportunity. And I'm not blaming anyone for it, but where I think there is an opportunity would be for the university and the county, I don't mean the county council, but the communities to recognise this opportunity, and for the university to benefit from this talent pool that's on its doorstep, and people who live here to have the opportunity to engage in this world-class university. But it is, frankly, I do think that there is a disconnect between the two, actually.
Am I right to follow?
Yeah.
Do you think there's potential in educating the students at the university in story of Durham?
Yeah, I do. I mean,
to create a connect from in terms of like incomers is the way I see it. I mean, I do feel like a stream, and I think it's because our story isn't heard within these walls at the university. Do you think there's potential there?
So yes, but I wouldn't limit it to that. So I mean, we've got this like really amazing, unique working class culture in County Durham that is expressed in so many different ways. You know, just like the obvious expression, of course, are the banners at the gala, but you know, there's the Durham quilters. There are the sort of the various hobbies and sports that people participate in, the brass bands, as I do as well, and the way that all of these settlements and communities are knitted together. And actually, there are a lot of people who live here who don't really have a full appreciation of that either, because we don't talk about it a lot. So yes, I think it would be something that for those students who are interested to know more about the place that they're living, it would be fantastic to give them the opportunity to learn about that. But I also think we shouldn't forget that we do need to talk to the people who are here about it as well, who live here, so that they can not only understand that Peter Lee isn't just a town, he was a great guy, but also that they've got a really fantastic history and culture of which they can be proud. And that's something that I hope the County of Culture will help us to showcase the culture of County Durham to the world, but also help a lot of people who live in County Durham as well to really kind of sit up with pride and respect the amazing culture and heritage that we have here too.
Yeah.
Chris, just to touch on one of the points that you mentioned about finding all sorts of interesting artifacts. I'm sure any large building will be the same. Are they available anywhere online to look at any type of catalogue being done so people could view them?
Yeah, so what the process we've been through has been to itemise every item that we've got. Most of the paper records are being sent to the Durham County Archives Office, where the archivist there will properly catalogue them and add them to their collection. So gradually over time, you'll be able to access the paper records through that route. We took that decision because they can properly care for those paper records in a way that we can't, and we haven't got the storage space. The physical objects and a small number of the paper records will be returned back to Redhills when the building reopens, and you'll be able to see them for yourself in a very interactive way when you come and visit the building. But you say you could walk into kind of any old building and find this stuff, but honestly, I have been astonished. So the process in Redhills over very many decades has this huge amount of democracy, keep absolutely everything, change nothing generally. And one of the first days I was there, I walked into this room where we were having a meeting, and I just sort of idly opened a drawer, and this drawer was stuffed full of ballot papers, which everyone raised an eyebrow. That's strange. The ballot papers are all in this particular place in the basement. For many, many decades, every time there was a ballot, the ballot papers were taken to this certain room. And, this is up until, 1990s. Ballot papers taken to a room, counted, the result recorded, the ballot papers put in on a shelf in the basement, the shelves of them actually in the basement. At some point, 70 years ago, someone was doing that in this room. And instead of walking downstairs to the basement, they put the ballot papers into this drawer and shut the drawer. And that was it. And they've been sat in that drawer for 70 years. So I just pulled it open, and it was the election of agents was the ballot. And I pulled the first one off the top, and it was the return from Blackhall, which is where I've lived my whole life, the Blackhall ballot. So, yeah, and I would have been the first person to touch that in 70 years. So it is remarkable, really. And stuff like that is just sort of, falling out of the building all over the place, really.
So will all of that be handled by the...
So all of that's gone to the county archives, yeah, and it will take...
Sometimes, obviously, you've got to pay that. There's quite a lot of other stuff, so if you're particularly interested in mining,
Yes.
and heritage like that, it would be
Well, I think it'll take them years to get through it. I really do. I mean, there are a number of good PhD projects in the material there. That's for certain.
And there are the records at Sunderland, the Newmark Record Office at Sunderland. There's a lot of material there.
And the Spending Road Mining Museum also have got some records here. Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll have to give a shout out to them as well.
Yeah. So, have we got any questions from the people who've zoomed in that would like to come and?
Susan Fedder waiting very politely.
Can we get them? Yeah.
Well, Susan and
There's
Fred.
Fred.
Can I go in for the kill? Can you hear me all right?
Or does somebody waiting?
Yeah.
It's Laura Hepburn. I'm just absolutely, what a fantastic, refreshing insight, obviously, into Redhills. But can I just congratulate you? It's so good to see somebody touching on the women, and Fiona and Annie and the kids that were involved. It was really great to see a really great inclusive presentation to the people involved, not just now, but in the past as well. And that was really great. So thank you for that, Chris. Really great presentation. And I look forward to what's coming in the future.
Thank you, Laura.
Do we have Fred Robinson? Fred, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, great presentation. Thank you very much indeed for that. I was wondering if you'd say something about the governance and management of the project. So those of us who live around about, I live just up the street, and want to be involved in the Redhills project in the future, how that will be enabled, how that will happen, what kind of relationship might we as locals and organisations locally be able to have with you?
Yeah, I certainly can, Fred. So at the very start, before the kind of all of the fundraising started, the project was kicked off. There was quite a lot of community involvement. There were some various kind of community groups that were set up and so on. A lot of that through the Banner network. At the point that the National Lottery Heritage Fund awarded the core funding for the building, I mean, I didn't say that, we've raised £7.5 million, 4.5 of which came from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and the rest of it we've raised ourselves. At that point, the charity was set up, and we set up a charity board with a board of trustees. I chair the board of trustees, and we have an academic on there who chairs an academic advisory panel. We have someone who comes from the Durham Miners Association. We have a lady who lives quite local to Redhills, who has a culture and heritage background. So you can see it's a fairly small group. So what we intend to do is grow that board of trustees over the next year to 18 months, and we're committed to adding 2 more trustees by the end of this year, and then another 2 next year as well, because the board does need to grow over time. But we want to do that in a way that kind of fits our absorptive capacity. So that's one thing from a governance perspective. But beyond that, what we are sort of thinking about at the moment, and it's not gone much beyond that, is essentially the board of trustees are running this organisation for the purposes of the local community. So we feel like we need to report to some other organisation. So what we're looking to set up is some sort of annual community conference, essentially, the first of which was likely to be in November this year. So watch out for that after the summer, where representatives of the local community will be invited to hear about the work that we're doing and provide some challenging feedback, essentially. So that's sort of the governance side of it. We are working that up in some detail over the course of the next couple of weeks, because we're making an application to the Arts Council to become a national portfolio organisation, which means that we would receive core funding from the Arts Council, but also means that we have to adhere to a very strict set of rules around governance, and that's including around equality, diversity and inclusion. And that's something that I've driven as the chair, and that's why one of my motivations for driving the application. It's less about the core funding and more about how it forces the organisation to adopt a rigorous approach to governance, equality, diversity and inclusion too. So that's kind of around that governance side. once the building is up and running, there is, as I mentioned, there's a community space in the building, and that space will be available for members of the local community and local community organisations to use as well, alongside the big conference spaces too. So we think, that will develop over time. But like everything we do at Redhills, we want it to be grassroots led. So our job is to be really responsive to need and not to be telling organisations what to do. So, for instance, we've had a couple of organisations have come to us and said that they have similar projects they'd like to do in their communities, in their villages, where they've got like mini Redhills. There's one in Seaham and there's another one, and they would like to kind of do a kind of project that we've done. And they've asked if we can help them by providing some support from what we've learned. And so that's a new thing that we never thought we'd do. But it looks like we're going to become a repository of knowledge and expertise in that way too. So that's it's not a complete answer, Fred, because we haven't got all the answers yet. But there's a real willingness and desire to involve people from the local community. And if you live locally, you might find that you do get very heavily involved, or hopefully you will. Thank you.
Can you tell people how you think they might best stay plugged in? Because it's obviously an evolving organisation, and the future is there to be like an adventure, really.
Yes.
So how do people stay with that and stay plugged in and informed?
Well, people can follow the social media. So there's Twitter and Facebook and social media and so on. And I think there's also a regular sort of email you can sign up for. And once we get close to the point the building's going to open, we'll be advertising volunteering opportunities as well. So if there are people out there who have got a bit of time and they would like to support through volunteering, there'll be opportunities for that too.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any? Fred, do you want to come back on that?
No, I'm happy with that. It's clearly work in progress. There's lots to do, wonderful things to do, and I'm very hopeful that the thing will bear enormous fruit.
I think so. Yeah, thank you. Do we have any more questions? Lynn?
Just one very quick one. As you know, Sandra and I were on the advisory board for the Redhills project from, I think it was December 2016 it started. And from memory, that very first meeting, the then executive were quite keen for part of the project to be able to offer scholarships to working class kids. Is that something that's potentially still in the pipeline?
Yeah, it is. And so I've kind of come quite close to hinting at that without actually saying anything. But I've talked to you about the 2 scholarships I've already set up. And I've also talked to you about how Fiona Hill benefited from a scholarship. And I'm not really at liberty to say anything more than that at the moment. But you might imagine we might be interested in doing something like that.
Anybody else on Zoom that would like to ask a question or make a comment or a contribution of any kind?
Yes, please, if I might.
Thank you, Charlotte.
It's Charlotte Adams. My background is giving me away, so I work for the Coal Authority, but I'm based in the innovation team, and that's looking at future uses of the mines to provide resources. And I'm just wondering what contact you have with ourselves, whether you want any contact. We've also got a really strong mining heritage team where we keep all our archives and just some of the materials you're talking about. Great if we could have those electronically as well, so people could access them too when they come to the Mining Heritage Centre. So it's basically, have you got much contact with ourselves, and would that be helpful?
So yeah, I mean, what you're talking about, I think definitely sounds like a good fit with what we're doing. So particularly in this period while the building's closed, then we've got like an activity plan that runs throughout the whole county as well. And if you've got items in your archives, for instance, that would be relevant, and we could make that available to people digitally or physically, then that's the sort of thing that we want to do. The challenge is, of course, I'm not across all of the connections that everybody has. So it may be there are people in the Coal Authority who've spoken to people at Redhills, and that's in train. But just to check, Fiona, why don't you drop me a line after this? Oh, sorry, I was looking at the screen. I apologise. Charlotte, it says Fiona on my screen. I apologise, Charlotte. Perhaps contact me afterwards, maybe via Lynn or whatever, and then I could connect you through with the team at Redhills. And if they're already talking, that's great. But if not, it really does sound of interest to me.
And then we can link your talk on our intranet probably. When Lynn's put it on YouTube, I can get our comms team to put it internally for all of our colleagues to look at. I mean, a lot of them are based in the Mansfield area where our head office is. I'm in County Durham. but I think they'd be interested. And I'd just like to say thanks as well. And it was really great that you did have all the women, the story of the women in there as well. So thanks for a great presentation.
Yeah, no, well, thank you, Charlotte. And I realise, obviously, it was mentioned earlier as well. There are really great stories about the women in the Durham coalfield. And, I always say mining is actually like a two-man job or a two-person job, if you'll allow me. The coal owner or the colliery only paid the wage to the man who went down the mine. But it was impossible for that man to do his job if there wasn't somebody else back at home doing all of the other work. It absolutely was a two-person job, and you can completely see that from the structure and how the communities were set up. So we do need to talk about the women in the coalfield as well.
We've got a couple of other questions on Zoom from Freya and another one from Fiona. If we could just take the question coming now from the live setting from Chima. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, no, thank you for the presentation, Chris. It was absolutely marvellous. You were just making about sort of women in the coalfields. Sort of led me to wonder, is there any interest at Redhills in collecting sort of oral history data around sort of the history of coalfield communities in the County Durham area?
So I know that there have been some oral history projects, and so yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that we can work on together. So there are people who are carrying out oral history projects, and we can use the facility that we have at Redhills to help to showcase that, but also help to connect people in with the communities as well. So we're more of a conduit for that, I think. And then should I just very quickly take the two that are on the screen as well? Because I realise we're pushed for time. So Fiona, as well as voluntary opportunities, will there be a range of jobs? Yes, we're slowly building the team. We've just appointed a communications manager. If anyone's interested in the jobs, keep an eye on the website and the social media, because that's where you'll see them advertised. And then Freya's asked about evaluation of the project. So we have a number of metrics that we've agreed to with National Lottery Heritage Fund. If we get NPO status from National Portfolio Organisation status from the Arts Council, then there'll be some metrics there as well. I mean, ultimately, it is a business, so it needs to work financially as well. That's one of the reasons I'm involved, because I've got business experience. The impact of the project will not be felt for decades, though, because when we're talking about the opportunities that we give young people, then you've got to you do that because it's the right thing to do and trust in the fact that it's going to have an impact on people's lives in the future, and it absolutely will. So then we've got a range of metrics in between that are measurable, and that we're working on too.
Thank you. Well, I think, Chris, you can gauge from the response and the enthusiasm that you've initiated in this talk today how much people have appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you.